Hello, everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen and Lauren Brooks. And on today's show, we're going to be finishing off a video that we were responding to by one Alice Cappelle entitled The Death of Feminism and the Future of Activism, where she is trying to make the case essentially against individual feminism and for a more intersectional, a more collectivist version. And we're basically just sort of like picking apart the logic there, you know, because ultimately, like, you know, no feminism is good feminism. It's all based in the same lie, and it always has been. And you know, these activists are always trying to sort of like rewrite history, reshape their beliefs, reshape your perceptions, so that like basically they can gaslight you into liking feminism. And I think that most of our modern society has been gaslit and fooled by this for decades. And it's actually one of the root problems that I think it's like one of the root causes of the primary problems that not only feminism creates, but gynocentrism is encouraged to do. So it's basically like a bigger problem than just the ideology. But anyway, so welcome to the show. And Hannah, how are you doing?
My allergy pills aren't kicking in. That's why I was kind of muted. So I've been sitting here snorking at everybody.
It's kicking up this already.
It's kicking off. It's the video. I'm allergic to feminism, so you know. we're all fine here. How are you?
Yeah. And Lauren Brooks, welcome. Yeah. What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, it's Friday. I'm so happy that it's Friday, but it threw me off. It so threw me off because we normally do the show on Thursday. So, Thursday, do the show Thursday. And then, and then I wake up Friday, I get my day done, and then I go home and I do nothing. Right. So it's just different coming home on Friday and be like, I had like maybe an hour between the time that I got home and we started the show. So yeah, and I had to fight the urge to lay down.
Yeah, that was
out of habit.
That was me on Thursday. I basically worked on Thursday. On Wednesday, from 11:30 p.m. until 4:30 Thursday.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so we had to move.
That's why we didn't do the show on Thursday.
Yeah, we had to move some things around, but I you know what, I forgot about that too, and I set it up. I was sitting here doing it, and like I forgot. Oh yeah, it's Friday. Now it kind of feels like a Thursday to me. But all right. Yeah. So with that said, if we threw you guys off, now you know we're doing just this week's HBR Talk on Friday, and I think that unless something else comes up. For the foreseeable future, it'll be at the usual day and time. So let us go ahead and... Oops, that was wrong. Let us go ahead and look at this video. I gotta share my screen with you guys so that you can see it. So let me go ahead and do that. You guys can join the stream so that you can see the video. Let me know when you're in there and you can see it. So, again, this video was done in 3 parts. The first part was called Cringe, and she is basically like talking about the kind of ultra privileged, Hollywood approved, TV feminism. And it makes because it's like coming from a place where, it's coming from like a rich and entitled and elitist place, it makes it easy for her to criticize it, even though like it's not really any different, right? But like this is this is one of the ways that they attack other forms of feminism that have maybe stepped away too much from the way that they want to frame their narrative. But ultimately, it's all the same. Ultimately, it's all the same. It's the same lies. It's based in the same lies, and they're just sort of engaging in like petty infighting to try and lift, their particular brand of feminism over the others. So that was the first section. She's going after Hollywood feminists. Easy to do. They're crazy annoying, but what they believe ultimately isn't that different. Okay? And then she went into a second chapter, which we got into, called Judgment, where she talks about all of the ways that, what she would consider to be like real feminists have written about the previous group. And I think that she's probably like more of a sex negative feminist too, which is another like old it's an old conflict that's going on within feminism, where there's like political lesbian sex negative feminists that believe that women should completely like segregate away from men or live apart from men or something like that, whereas sex positive feminists, they're they want to sleep around, they want to sleep with men and women, like and essentially be a part of that kind of like sexual revolution, which essentially considered sexuality to be a form of property that the patriarchal systems use to control women, and so women need to liberate themselves from that and seize the means of reproduction. So and again, it's ultimately all the same shit, but
they're fighting their inner tradcon wife demons.
Yeah,
right?
Essentially. I mean, like, there's a lot of qualities in sex positive feminists that are basically tradcon qualities, and there are qualities in the sex negative feminists that are basically like slut qualities. So like there isn't really that much of a difference, but there's a lot of fighting over like the little things, like the word, what this word means, and essentially men's relationship to both is the enemy. So it even if they want to have sex with them, they're supposed to consider them to be their enemy. They're predatory. They should be kept at an arm's length. This is why they want to, they want to sleep with them, but they don't want to date them or whatever it is.
Well, the short version is when feminists say they are sex positive, they mean sex that women have control over.
Yeah.
But no responsibility for. Right. But when they say they're sex negative, then they basically are claiming that women have no control over sex when they have sex with men. That's the difference. One is that they want to at least allow women that little caveat. They just don't want to admit it, and the other just doesn't want to allow the caveat because they don't want to admit it.
Yeah. It always comes back to pride.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we're going to be looking at the third chapter now, called How We Can Move Forward. So this feminist is going to explain to her feminist audience the direction or what has to happen from here on out. So we're going to go ahead and play the next section now.
I come from a country, France, where Islamophobia is pretty bad.
Oh, France! Oh. I should have known. I should have known. I don't like to consider, like, I don't like bigotry of any kind, but the French just keep coming up. Like, I'm sorry. Remy, I apologize, but Jesus Christ, can you guys do something about this? All right.
Put a lid on it, Jesus.
Yeah. Man. These French, they just don't want to stop. All right.
You may have heard of the Hijab ban. In the past few years, France has tried its best to ban the headscarf in as many public spaces as possible, universities, courts, sport competitions, and sometimes even at work. those decisions are part of a longer history of Republican secularism in France. Basically, we don't really like religion unless it's Christianity. It's our culture. By the way, look what I found at the charity shop a few months ago.
All right, I'm just pausing it there.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna have to, because I can't with this. Okay, the hijab is not a part of Islam. Okay, it's not anywhere in the Quran. I was a Muslim, I should know, right? It's not regulated for women to wear the hijab in the Quran. It's not a religious doctrine. It is a societal one that was placed upon them by the men. Their patriarchy, okay? And this was just very recently, because I'm sure you've seen the photos of and the videos of the women in Iran when it was before the hijab was introduced. None of them wore headscarves. None of them wore any of it.
Yeah, you can find pictures of Iran from like the 1960s, and the women there looked like a European woman might have looked.
Yeah, there's another part to this, something that people are completely ignoring when they complain about the hijab being banned in France. The ban that was initiated, I guess, in I want to say 2004. Yep, here's the article on it.
You can drop it in the live. Drop it in the live show.
Because I remember this. I looked this up because you can't wear a nun can't wear her veil, her habit, her head covering. I can't remember what it's called. It's not called, the head covering itself is not called like a veil or habit. It has a name, but I'm not Catholic and I can never remember what it is.
Okay.
But a nun can't wear that. You can't, like in some places you can't wear a great big cross. Like I've seen people do this where they've got a cross that is as big as your hand on the front of their chest, or on their neck, or they have I've even seen women wear cross earrings big enough that they brush their shoulders and stuff.
They basically banned students from wearing any signs of religious affiliation at state schools, including Muslim headscarves, Jewish skull caps, and large Christian crosses.
Right, and they banned full face veils in public places, which again, that's not necessarily a religious thing. Remember, France has had its fair share of terrorist activity where, people have walked into a place with a gun and shot a lot of people or hit somebody with a vehicle. And that's so that they can't use a face covering to keep themselves from being identified. It has absolutely nothing to do with banning the religion and everything to do with preventing, just like up until COVID. When I've worked at a few different retail establishments that had signs on the doors that say, at Halloween when people would, go out in costumes and everything that say you can't come in here with a mask on. And it's because, if you're going to rob a place, you cover your face. In the wintertime, they'd always said, that you had to take off your ski mask too. You couldn't go into a gas station with a ski mask. You couldn't go into a grocery store with a ski mask. You had to, at least in my neighborhood, you had to remove those things so that if you held them up, your face was on camera, and that prevented holdups, because who wants to be identified after they've pointed a gun at someone, right?
Right.
So this really is selective discussion of one aspect of this ban to make it look like it's targeted religiously, and to make it look like there's a prejudice against that specific religion, when in fact, actually, this targets all different religions. And you can't have a face covering even if it's not religious.
Right. So it's not even about religion. And she's not just like selectively leaving things out. She's lying, because she said that the only religion that they respect in France is Christianity. So she's literally constructing a lie about that, because if nuns can't wear their habits, and and all the Jews and all of it, and even people who aren't religious, they can't walk around wearing face coverings, then the issue is not religion. So she's already operating under a false premise about French law, and she's also essentially using that to construct a narrative, because ultimately what she's trying to do, I think, is essentially say, these are the causes that feminists should be fighting for because intersectionality. And she's starting with something that isn't even, couldn't be defined as a feminist cause. And that's like before you even like start, if because, it's wild, like, when it comes to the hijab or the niqab or the burqa or whatever, the way that Islamic women dress in certain parts of the Islamic world, when it comes to that, the feminists can't decide whether it's like, whether it needs to remain in place because religious, commitment and Muslim women, because you don't want to impose your Western values onto them or whatever, or if they're being oppressed by the men, because patriarchy in Islam, and of course they can't square that circle, because their framing of both is a lie, and the real reality would be to leave them alone, because it's like, this is the way they want to live. Who gives a shit, right? And frankly, there's like there's probably a lot of good that might come out of that. I know the women are doing, like, I would say reasonably well, because they're essentially protected by their men. And that's kind of like at the basis of every civilization and every culture, is that the men look after the women. And that's the same for Islam. So this is another reason why they can't actually like talk about it honestly, because again,
and it is a display of boundary issues when it really comes down to it, because again, these rules are not just about banning religion, which, like, I don't think anything like this could conceivably take place in the United States without a lot of change happening, because you're messing with someone's freedoms when you determine that they can't wear something, right? That's not considered obscene. But because of what's happened in France, like this isn't happening in a vacuum. France didn't all of a sudden decide religion is bad and you can't wear any of the displays of your religion in public because they hate religion. They did this because of conflicts that are taking place between people of Abrahamic religions. So you have Christians, Jews, and Muslims do not get along in Western countries, and they don't get along in Middle Eastern countries. And so, like, it's different in China. China, they came along, they're like, we hate religion. You can't be religious. We're communists. Fuck all your religions, and we're going to put you in camps. Right? Mm-hmm. That's overt hatred of religion. France said, all right, you guys are shooting each other, hitting with cars, being targeted if you wear this display of your religion, and targeting people if you wear this display of your religion, and back and forth. You just can't show anybody any evidence of your religion, and you can't cover your face. So if you do commit a crime, we know who you are. Right? That's a different story. Yeah. And that's a boundary. That's, you can't hide yourself and commit a crime against another person. And we're talking extremely violent crimes. Like, we're not talking shoplifting or pickpocketing, where we're talking shooting people and hitting people with vehicles and stabbing people to death and beating people to death in the streets and, mobbing them and stuff. There's a huge difference there. And I genuinely would compare this to the intersectional feminist narrative that if you don't have sex with someone who identifies as the gender that you're attracted to, that you're phobic. Mm-hmm. If they're trans, and it's bullshit. Attraction isn't just about body type, right?
Mhm.
There are people who are specifically attracted, like I'm specifically attracted to intelligence. That's not a
Mhm.
body type, right? Unless you count the wrinkles in somebody's brain, and you have to open up their head to do that, which is kind of gross. But yeah, I don't know if I'm uniquely situated to explain this to people or not, but gender identity is not a particular attraction, right? If
No.
somebody is not attracted to you, then they have a boundary, and saying they're phobic because they won't have sex with you is a boundary issue. It's
Yeah.
rapey, and
Yeah.
telling people that they should feel offended and discriminated against and mistreated because somebody isn't attracted to them is wrong, right?
Yep.
We don't tell guys that women who don't have feelings for them, like who friend zone them and stuff like that, should feel discriminated against and mistreated. We do tell them they shouldn't put up with being used. We tell them that, yes, it's crappy for women to have unrealistic expectations for what a man's going to be like, and then have below realistic expectations for themselves.
Mhm.
But we don't say it's your right to have someone be attracted to you, because nobody has that right. Nobody has that right to tell other people what to think of them, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically what's going on here. Is this intersectional feminist group is essentially telling a public, you have to allow these people to tread on your right to self-defense, your right to provide for your own real, genuine, physical safety, and you're just SOL, if somebody points a gun at you, because it's
Mhm.
phobic for you to object to anything that they might do to facilitate their ability to get that gun into your face.
Yeah. Yep. So she's leaving all this out. She's basically just saying France is Christian, therefore patriarchal, therefore they're really, really unfair to Muslim women. And now she's showing us some picture of the Pope. By the way,
Well, you're hovering over the button.
Oh, I just moved my thing away.
Sorry.
Is it still
Oh,
doing
okay.
that? Okay.
Nope, it's not.
Okay.
I'm keeping it for like a birthday present or something. Muslim women are constantly.
She said she found that in a thrift shop. If it's in a thrift shop, somebody didn't want it.
Yeah. It's a photo of, like, I guess, Benedict and who's the current Pope? What's his name?
Francis.
Yeah, Pope
believe.
Francis and I think Pope Benedict. I think, and they're like, I don't know, they're embracing or something. So, look, I'm not Catholic, but I'm not a hater either. So
yeah, we don't know who I don't know who the names of any of the popes are, because it's not something that I usually pay attention to.
I only know that, like, this guy, like Pope Francis, he looks a lot like the guy from Brazil, the movie, and the other guy, Benedict, who's like the older one, he looks like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. That's the only reason why I know. I'm telling you, look at pictures of Benedict and Francis. Man, Francis looks so much like Jonathan Pryce. It's fucking crazy. All right, but anyway.
I'm keeping it for like a birthday present or something. Muslim women are constantly presented as victims. They are never invited on TV shows to express their opinion, share their ideas or experience. Honestly, I found this obsession with Muslim women very disturbing. Like, yes, I can recognize a Muslim woman in the street because she's wearing a headscarf, but I can also recognize a Catholic woman because of the length and thickness of her skirt. In both cases, they are trying to cover some parts of their bodies or their body entirely. But why do we only get mad when it's Muslim women?
Is this where we're going? Like, are we just going to talk about Muslim women for the rest of the...
It's starting to sound like it. And the dumb thing is, you shouldn't get mad when any women cover parts of their bodies. It's a woman's choice, just like it's a man's choice. And here we are. And well, it's not really a man's choice, actually. If men don't cover up most of their bodies at work, they look unprofessional to everybody around them. But women can go to work with their chests out, like everything but their nipples. And it's perfectly accepted. You can have a shirt that just barely
a high school shop class, and then
well, actually, no. If you are a biological female teacher and you show cleavage, you get called into the office and told not to wear that to school. Seriously, because I have friends and family who are biological female teachers. You're only allowed to show your tits in class if they're fake.
Apparently.
And if you also have a dick. Right? That is it. And it does not matter. Genuinely does not matter whether this is a trans woman or a transgender doing this. In that story in Canada, this is not behavior that is treated normally as acceptable for women who are teachers. So it shouldn't be. If this is a person who's going to identify as a woman, then they should have to meet the same standards as every other woman who works as a teacher, or those standards should change for all female teachers. Like, you can't have a separate standard for trans women than for other women, or you are saying that trans women are not real women, right? Like, right there, you're saying, oh, trans women are a separate entity. Like, so that whole issue with that teacher, I don't care if a teacher is trans. I don't care if a teacher identifies as a sex that they don't present as. I care if a double standard exists, and that is a pretty huge double standard right there. Pun intended.
Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
but anyway,
go
ahead.
I think I need to bring it up because she's saying that, oh, you don't see Muslim women on TV. Are you kidding me? Do you watch the BBC? Like,
well, she's French,
they
so.
are. Well, okay.
Do they have an equivalent in France? Like, do they have FBC?
Who the hell knows?
Is that the fucking bitch
God.
channel?
No,
let's all right. I'll take that and say that maybe that's just her limited experience, right?
Yeah.
But you can't on one hand complain about there not being enough representation, and then in the same breath you turn around and say, oh well, here's this attention that they're getting. Well, but it's not. It's wrong attention. I don't like this attention that and I'm not saying that if anybody is trying to like oppress Muslim women or say that they can't.
Well,
they can't.
She's already framed it that way, so that's why she's talking about, oh, Muslim women are oppressed because France doesn't allow them to wear hijabs because France is Christian, even though we've already shown that that's not the reason, and they do this to basically anyone. And then, but she's already set up the frame, the initial frame, women are oppressed, Muslim women are especially oppressed. Then she goes, well, here's more proof. They're not on enough TV shows, which is, it's kind of retarded because it's not exactly like the most pressing thing. But on top of that, I'm sure that they are, for one, I'm sure that if Muslim women make up a, somewhat significant percentage of the French population, they are probably on TV, just like you will find Muslim women, Hindu women, and all kinds of other women on the BBC in the UK, because they are a not insignificant percentage of the population. And of course, the BBC wants to show how woke it is by essentially giving them representation. But here's the thing that I'm wondering about. If a Muslim woman was actually given a platform and we actually wanted to hear what she believed, she might not say something that feminists will like. So what are you going to do then? Like, if they basically say, well, I think that we should all adopt Sharia, and I think that all of these, these slutty women out here should start dressing the way that I dress, and I think that they need to, submit to Allah and Muhammad. I mean, I think that there's actually probably a really high chance of that being what they would say, because of course, right, they're highly religious people. They think that their lifestyle and their beliefs are the best ones, and they think that other people should take them on. But she thinks, I guess, because all women want to be free and all women are by extension feminist, so no woman could possibly come forward and say, no, you know what, I like that my husband drives me everywhere and I don't have to do it myself. I like the fact that he takes care of me and that he pays for everything. I like the fact that I get to like treat my femininity as something sacred, which is why I wear, you know, these clothes that hide my face so that only my husband gets to see me and no one else does. That gives me tremendous power, right, in the marriage and in my community, because all the other women are doing it. And of course, these clueless feminists, like they don't think women make choices. You know, that's ultimately where this comes down to, right? That women who are religious, well, they're just indoctrinated. You know, they don't know any better. But then she also spent like a whole beginning part essentially just shitting on sex positive feminism, which I think, because sex is kind of like at the base of everything we are as human beings, this is likely the reason why Islam works the way that it does, where it essentially, like, you know, promotes family. I mean, you could disagree with the way they do it, but that's what they do. That's why, you know, one man, one woman, lots of kids. That's why they're outbreeding so many people, because that's what they promote. Right. So,
well, one thing that feminists fail to understand, or they deliberately ignore, and I think it's more often the latter than former, is that if you set up a society where one demographic has no responsibility for themselves or anybody else, right? They don't have to protect themselves. They don't have to make smart choices about their lives. If they make a mess, it's somebody else's job to come in and fix what has happened to them because of that mess. They don't have to provide for themselves. Somebody else's job is to provide for their welfare, their financial support, their protection, their physical protection, their health, their diet, everything. Right? Somebody else is responsible for every aspect of their lives. And then you have another demographic that is responsible for everybody. The irresponsible demographic, the demographics that are developing, that go into responsibility later, all children, and all threats from outside of their culture. Like, they're responsible for preventing others from coming in and causing harm. They're responsible for themselves, and they're super responsible for themselves. So even if they don't have control over a particular factor, if it affects them and it affects the people around them, they become responsible for mitigating it. Right? Even if they have zero control, they still have responsibility for mitigating it. What you get is a culture built around providing the responsible demographic with as much ability as possible to live up to their responsibilities by infringing on the freedoms of the irresponsible demographic, because you don't need freedoms if you're not responsible for yourself. If you're not responsible for yourself, you need guardianship. Right? And guardianship is what they have. And we had that in Western culture. It was called coverture. Under coverture, a husband or a father was entirely responsible for wives or daughters. And your brother could be responsible for you. Your male cousin could be responsible for you under certain circumstances. If you were a widow and you went into a workhouse in Europe, prior to modern law, but under the laws that were influenced by like English common laws and laws of other countries in Europe, your family could be billed. If they could find any member of your family could be billed for your care. Under English poor laws, the first support system like that was set up, child support was invented under English poor laws, and family responsibility, financial responsibility was. So you go into a workhouse and they pay you a very tiny wage and then take it back for working there, and they take it back for you living there, but you still owe more because they didn't pay you as much as they charged you to live there and eat there. Then they find your cousin, like second cousin, twice removed cousin, be like, oh, well, your second cousin twice removed has been living in this poorhouse for 4 or 5 years. You owe the government this much money. Right? That's how these societies work. And that person can say, well, send him to live with me. You have to go there. Right? You don't get a choice. You don't get to say, no, I want to stay at the poorhouse. You go live with that person. That person could basically enslave you. Well, I have to pay for your time in the poorhouse, so you're going to have to work on my farm. And, you're going to have to work in my bakery. That's the way the world always worked prior to like feminists coming along and saying, well, we don't like that being applied to women. And so now we have a situation where they've alleviated women's experience of coverture, but we still have laws that say if a woman that you've had sex with chooses to carry to term, gets pregnant, like chooses not to use birth control, chooses to carry to term, chooses to retain custody of the child instead of using the adoption system, you owe money. And we still have this. If you are married and your wife divorces you, you owe money. And we even have daughters that have sued their fathers for expenses for college and stuff. So, I mean, the system sort of forgave women's inability to be responsible for themselves, but it didn't alleviate men of that responsibility that made up for women's lack of responsibility for themselves. And I think in some ways that's been more destructive to our society than the imbalance in responsibility and imbalance in freedom in Islamic societies has been to theirs. In other ways, it hasn't. I mean, our male disposability hasn't gotten to the point where adults are strapping bombs to children and sending them into war yet. We don't throw our men's lives away in wars that we don't have to fight until after they're legally adults. But we still do it, right? We still have that imbalance. So, I mean, like all of this discussion of Islamophobia and imbalance in rights and everything, feminists just completely ignore the fact that while women have had their rights reduced under these systems, it's because men have had their rights reduced under the systems in conjunction with being considered responsible for women. And if you really want a system where women maintain equal status to men and women can have equal rights to men and not be resented and not have that undone at some point, or not have crime affecting women that is treated as unique or uniquely scary and bad when it happens to a woman, and the woman is not considered uniquely crippled afterward, right? You have to end the system where you force men to be responsible for women regardless of the man's interest in taking that responsibility, and women should be responsible for themselves just as much as men are considered responsible for themselves. But we won't have that conversation with feminists because that's inconvenient. Their entire basis of their religion, and it is a religion, is the idea that we should have the system where men are responsible for women, women have no responsibility, but women still have all the same freedoms that the responsible demographic has.
Yep. Okay.
Her face looked so dumb in the face of that understanding.
All right, so she's essentially saying, but why do we only get mad when it's Muslim? Well, for another thing I want to say, I don't think anyone does. Does anybody get mad when they see a Muslim woman wearing like a face covering? Does anybody?
No.
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 No. Nobody cares. Like if you had never seen it before, you might have questions. Because you don't know what you're looking at. But in general, nobody gets mad. This is another thing that feminists do is they bait you with things and then they say, "Why are you so upset about this? Why do you care so much about this?" It's like, no, you're the one doing this. So somebody said I turn into the Hulk when I see it. Yeah, I turn into the Wolfman when I see it. I just can't stand that shit.
At the pharmacy where I used to work, there was a couple that used to come in and shop, and the woman of the couple was wearing a burqa every time she came in, and usually it was black. So it was just this full body covering with lace over the face, so she had a way to look out. You could not even see her eyes, right? Mm-hmm. And her husband was so attentive, like she would speak very quietly to him, and he would nod and speak back to her very gently and quietly and everything. And
of course,
anytime she hesitated, he would turn, and like put his fingertips on her arm, or where you would see an arm if you could see how she was dressed and everything. And then she would speak to him, and he might, hold on to a hand, and you could see the shape of a hand, right, and help her walk through it. And sometimes like a shadow would be all it would take. There's a shadow on the floor and she can't tell if something's there. Or we had a spot where a pole divided the walkway through the aisle, and he helped her walk through there. And it was like leading a person around and being very careful about that person and making sure that person was constantly that person was safe. And at first, your first instinct is, oh, isn't that sweet? And then you realize, that guy was probably trained from the beginning, from the time he was a little kid, to be a constant caregiver for his wife. Which,
probably.
That's their culture. That's how they live, right? But it isn't necessarily particularly sweet, because you can view her as a captive, but if you're going to be fair and you're going to view her as a captive, you got to view him as her slave.
Mm-hmm.
Which is essentially like, even if he's commanding to her, he's her slave in the same way that a bodyguard is a slave. And I mean, it's great for people to be protective of each other when they're married and they love each other, but the bodyguard relationship is a totally different thing. That's not sweet and cute. It's to me, it just looked like, well, if that's their culture and they're going to live that way, that's one thing, but I sure wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I like being able to take care of myself, and I wouldn't want my husband to have his whole life wrapped up in, am I okay, and never think about himself.
Right.
All right, let's play more of the video.
Other example, you remember the Jasmine controversy we talked about earlier? Well, I think it's a good example to understand how we can navigate discussions, feminist discussions, while respecting women's choices. Faced with Jasmine's testimony, sexologist Shan Budram remained absolutely non-judgmental, but still, she asked questions. Jasmine said that if her man was a college course, she would have an A in his studies, to which Shan asked, "And would he get an A in your studies?" It took a few seconds for Jasmine to answer, "I think so." As I said previously, a wave of responses followed the release of the podcast. Among those responses, 2 really stood out for me.
All right, I'm just pausing it there just because we don't want to go too far. So, I don't know, like, she didn't really conclude anything from that last podcast, but there was a woman, and I guess she was being asked questions about her boyfriend or her husband, I'm not sure which, and the woman compared her understanding of the relationship between herself and her man to a college course, and said that she felt as though she had an A in it. Like she really understood his needs or whatever, right? She was mostly just patting herself on the back. And then the interviewer asked her, well, what about him? Do you think that, what's his grade for essentially like, you know, being your boyfriend or man or whatever?
Yeah.
And she said, I think it would be an A. Like, she had more doubt. So that was basically the extent of it. Again, I don't know why that matters. But if you don't know for sure, it means you haven't been paying attention.
The interesting thing is how the women view it versus like, or how those women view it and the feminist views it versus how it actually would be. Because I think that woman is a trad wife. The one being interviewed there. Mm-hmm. And under actual tradition, and I always have to say that because there's neo-tradcons that are like, this is what we think tradition was and we're living it. There are tradcons from like the boomer and greatest generation age, which are like, we have always done these things and we're going to keep doing them. And there's tradition that goes back hundreds of years, which is different than what modern generations did because the circumstances were different. But under traditional marital history, both partners would have to learn about each other. It would be important to know about your partner so that you could form a relationship that made your household work and made you a unified front against the challenges that you faced: poverty, inclement weather, housing issues, all of that. You know, any conflicts with your neighbors, dealing with authorities and so on, taxes, whatever. Like, all of that was something that you were a team and you dealt with it as a team, you know, versus in the mid 20th century when like the baby boomer generation was like, well, if we don't like each other anymore, one of us is going to leave. And Gen X, half our generation is divorced. And, you know, then you look at millennials, like a quarter of their generation just didn't bother to get married. And now Zoomers are talking about just abolishing marriage. So what's tradition anymore in that instance? A lot of them have life partners that they are never going to marry. And this bonding of the partnership is a totally different thing. So these women are talking about whether or not, you know, the dedication in the relationship goes both ways. But when I see the one woman talking about knowing everything about her husband, it's also a description of how she feels she's showing him appreciation. And I don't think she realizes that when the other woman asks her if her husband would get an A in her class, if she's being asked, does he appreciate you? And the truth is he probably does, because there aren't very many women that will dedicate themselves to their husband. There aren't very many women that expect when they get into a permanent relationship with a man that must be a partnership of equal consideration for the other's welfare and equal investment, emotional investment in maintaining that welfare. And so they don't, it's just, well, we're living together and we have sex a lot. And that's love. That's what they view as love. So I think that the tradcon in that conversation doesn't fully understand what she's claiming to be dedicated to. And I think the sex positive feminist in that conversation actually doesn't fully understand what she's asking about either.
Yeah, they probably are talking past each other. All right, let's play some more.
Brunelli and Tinoir. Highly recommend you watch the full videos. I'll put them in the description. Similarly to Shan, Brunelli and Tinoir weren't judgmental, but they asked questions. And I'm pretty sure most women watching their videos would come out either rethinking submission or giving it up completely. In the end, I think choice feminism is just a consequence of living in a society that values different experiences, different voices. It is necessary that we include as many experiences as possible in feminist discussions, even if those experiences aren't the purest form of feminism.
All right. So that's kind of interesting. So there's like, there are these videos I think, made by black women who are essentially like promoting feminine, femininity and submitting to their men, and a kind of tradcon or some form of tradcon like approach to relationship. And I find that interesting because in the black population, like it's a mess, absolute disaster, and I think there are black women who are trying to essentially, this is just like a way for them to try to salvage their future. So they're basically like, oh, I'm gonna, and I bet that some of it has to do with black men who have also been creating content saying, I'm looking for a good woman and I can't find one, because the truth is that, like I said before, in the black population, it's a mess. Like there's a lot of fatherlessness, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of hostility and anger, there's a lot of distrust between men and women, and everything else. So it's just like an absolute disaster. And I think that black men and black women are trying to find a solution. So you have black women, and more of them are, I guess, trying to find the solution to their problems. And being that they're women, I guess their thought is, well, I'm going to go back to being really feminine and submissive or whatever. And hopefully that will work. And I'm going to learn how to be good to my man. I'm going to learn how to, care for him and everything else. And I think that's what those videos were about. And obviously I know why this French feminist is highlighting them. And I think it's mostly because they're women of color. So it's basically all about, look at me, I'm not racist because here's some black women, and we should listen to them and what they have to say and blah blah blah. But I wonder also if this isn't a tactic for the feminism to try and gain favor with trad women, as long as they're minority trad women. Like a white trad woman is still the enemy. But if
you think about it, she's doing the same thing they are. She's being a trad wife to black feminism. She probably has her own thoughts and opinions on this that she's keeping to herself. She probably has conflicting feelings about the discussion, where she may not agree with things that they've said, but she's not going to voice those, because she views herself as an intruder in that situation, or a person who should be of lower power in that situation because of who she is. And in its purest form, the submissive wife idea is the same way. They view, they take the idea that the husband being considered head of the household in the Christian religion and in other traditional religions means that he is owner and controller of his wife, that she has no input or that she has no authority in the household. And that's not exactly traditional in the Christian religion. So when you see, I don't know if it's traditional in non-Christian religions, but it doesn't appear so from the outside, at least, that the woman has no authority in actual tradition. But this is again neo-tradcon interpretation of tradition, and I think she's doing the same thing with people of higher or more, I guess, authoritative position on the progressive stack own the people who are in a lower authoritative position on the progressive stack, and therefore have the right to dictate policy. And it's her job as a person in a lower position on the progressive stack to follow that policy, and that's what she's doing. So she's being submissive because she views her victimhood as inferior to the victimhood of the people to whom she is submitting. Because victimhood is authority in feminism. That's why she can't criticize the neo-tradcon, but she also can't criticize the people who are questioning the neo-tradcon.
Right. So she's kind of writing a new narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Advances don't come from pointing at each other and decide who's more feminist. That's extremely elitist. Very isolating for women who cannot opt out of oppression like that, and the reason why people hate white feminism. We empower each other by asking questions, by relating to one another in our communities or across communities.
So, I hate that feminists coined the term white feminism because it's their out. Like I swear to God,
Right.
like this is why I don't criticize feminism based on race, because I have seen what extremely bitter and angry non-white feminist women are willing to do. And this also gives them an out. Like every time that, oh, that's white feminism. That's not my feminism. My feminism is not white. But it's the same. Like they're really the same. At the end of the day, they boil down to the same root belief system, which is why I hate it when they do this. And of course she's clearly like throwing herself onto the sacrificial block, like, oh, I'm a white woman and it's so terrible that I had an opinion on feminism. It's like your race has nothing to do with the problems of feminism. It's feminism itself, like as an idea.
Yeah.
Don't use your whiteness, because you're basically just trying to get people to, it's like what's the saying from the Mummy, the line, he said that it's better to be the right hand of the devil than in his path. As long as I serve him, I am immune. That's essentially what she's doing. She is essentially just saying, look, I am a sinner because I'm white, but I'm going to use my privilege to maximize your access to the platform, provided that you don't turn against me, even though they will eventually, because there's a lot of vengeance and bitterness in the black female population against white people and against men.
What strikes me is that phrase, women who can't opt out of oppression. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Women who can't opt out of oppression. All right. Do you understand what oppression actually is? Because if it's optional, it's not oppression. It's a choice. Okay. And that's the difference between being a slave and being a submissive wife, or being in a BDSM relationship versus being a real master and slave in a relationship, right? If it's optional, you are play acting at oppression. If you have the option to opt out and you don't, you are not oppressed.
Yep.
Not in the slightest.
I got a super chat from Meredith G, and she gives us $5 and says, feminism was always an elitist belief system that depends on treating women as victims, as a thought-terminating cliche, no matter what form it takes. Yeah. So I agree, that's where it came from. Well, I guess I agree with most of what you're saying, like probably all of it. But they're basically going to try and use class arguments or race arguments in order to distract and counteract any like actual criticisms of feminism itself, because it's all about keeping that alive, right? And I think it's really it's an easy trap to fall into, to make the class argument, because it is ultimately another one of their arguments. So you're supporting their arguments in that case if you're not supporting their arguments in this other case, right? And even though there could be some, there could be some utility to the class argument, you have to be careful, because it's what gets used to essentially like bring on socialism and communism, which is ultimately what they want. The only difference is that feminists want to turn men into a slave class, and they want to take all of their resources and redirect it to it themselves. And That's, you know, and again, you can just make the class argument, or you can make the race argument, which is also itself a class argument, which is why she said that, you know, these are women who cannot opt out of oppression, and she's really saying it's because they're black and brown. And because the presumption is black and brown women are poorer and they have fewer opportunities and everything is worse for them because race and sex, right? The intersection. So, and of course she thinks that when she says all this, she's being really empathetic,
progressive,
or yeah, but like thoughtful, right? Like, oh, I know that you guys are really poor and everything, and you can't, you know, think your way out of a paper bag or whatever. But it's okay because we are gonna make sure that you are taken care of. And you could say like that's racist or whatever, but I don't think it's constructive, and I don't think it's true. I think they legitimately believe that they're helping poor people, or that they're helping the less fortunate, and that it's not really like coming from a place of like a feeling of elitism or superiority, but it's easy for others to like try to make that argument, but I don't think it's ultimately all that useful, because if you make any of those sort of class, race, or gender-based arguments, even to counteract feminists, you're kind of fueling them anyway, because then they're like, oh, so you agree on the race thing, well, let's pivot to this now, and now you're stuck because you just went along with their narrative. So
there's also the fact that people talk about feminism as though like the racial and class divisions among feminists and women who are activists in general are something new, and they're not. If you look back, like say you go back to the middle of the 20th century, and you look at the difference between female activists who were pushing for changes in the workplace and changes to marital law and stuff like that, you see a lot of women who are maybe middle class, women who have college degrees, women who have worked their way into jobs where you get a salary instead of an hourly rate and stuff like that. Whereas if you look at the women who were pushing for changes culturally, a lot of times you're looking at, you know, women who were of a lower income, and they were not necessarily pushing for changes just for women culturally. They were changes that they wanted to see for their class, so men and women. And if you look at the women who were starting to recognize, hey, these laws are taking the father out of the home, these laws are these social changes are criminalizing normal behavior or behavior that it has no victim in men and boys, and men and boys are being incarcerated because they're doing things that are not actually hurting people, or they're being incarcerated because of false allegations. Like all of that, those are not the women who were fighting necessarily for women to have more status and power in the salaried workplace. Those are the women who are going to be labeled anti-feminist, or who would get sort of shuffled off to the side, even if they were part of the feminist movement. And women who were noticing that, hey, we have objected as a movement to the concept of rape, and yet we live in a society where rape is considered part of the punishment. If a man goes to prison, that's bad, right? They get pushed out of initiatives that they started, or that they were heavy participants in with regard to issues like that. And it gets taken over by these stupid intersectional feminists who then turn around and make it about women. So activists like the suffragettes, if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, they had a counterpart, suffragists. Suffragettes were fighting strictly for women's voting rights. And they didn't want voting laws to change. They didn't want to allow poor people to vote. They didn't want to allow black people to vote, They didn't want to allow any minorities to vote. Right? They weren't even. Some of them weren't even sure they wanted people of a different religious denomination to be able to vote. But they wanted women of their class and race and religious affiliation to be able to vote, because that would double the votes from their class and race and religious affiliation. So you had the suffragists. The suffragists were fighting for universal vote, and they supported the 15th Amendment. They supported giving voting rights to everybody. They supported, or they opposed, I should say, things like poll taxes and literacy tests and stuff like that would be used to keep certain classes, economic classes and races and anybody else that the local authorities didn't want voting to vote. Those were used to control elections, right? So those were a different group of activists, and there were women in both groups. The difference is when women are not in a position of privilege, when they're not in a position of economic privilege and social privilege because they're married to somebody who makes money, or they are from a family that is prestigious, right? Or they're in a social majority in their culture, like the dominant denomination within their religion and stuff. They fight side by side with the men in terms of culture, not necessarily in terms of picking up a rifle and defending it on a battlefield, but in a social battlefield where what you wear matters and where you stand matters and who you associate with matter. They will take those risks at least, whereas these women won't do that, and they won't care if the policies they fight for affect the men in their lives. They won't care until it affects them personally. Then it's my husband lost his job because of condition X that I ignored throughout my entire life until it affected how many coffees I could afford to buy a week instead of making them at home. Now it's bad. But yeah, she can go on about her conflict within feminism as if it's really just all about end of 20th century, beginning of 21st century conflicts between race and class that never happened before within women's activism.
Yeah. All right. I got a super chat from Senior Sticks, who gives us $2. It says, "Free choices for women is oppressing to women." Of course it is. And I thought that was obvious. And let me check.
That's Marxist feminism in a nutshell.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, Super Chow. So I do have a Super Chow. An anonymous Super Chower sent us $5 and said, "Thank you for being well informed on various topics, including behavior, history, and culture. I'm having a hard time looking up further knowledge on your website. Is there a way to find any more wisdom aside from just the podcast talks that I catch on your streams from time to time?" Well, technically we have another YouTube channel that doesn't have live streams, but there are a number of short videos on there. We used to use it a lot more, but then we started losing subs on that one. So you
also join our Discord, because there's a thriving community in our Discord that shares information back and forth. There's a free way to join our Discord, and I'm pretty sure it's actually linked on the website on honeybadgerbrigade.com.
Yeah, you can pay for access. That'll give you like more of the rooms. I think almost all of them. But there is like a town square area.
Right, there's a free public area. And then I would also say visit avoiceformen.com, ncfm.org.
Mm-hmm.
Go look up Justice for Men and Boys, which is European. It's from the UK, and their website. Go to reddit.com's r men's rights subreddit. Look up I believe it's menarhuman.com, and hang on a second, and I will tell you the Twitter account to follow here. I just have to make sure, because there's more than one Twitter account with the name Men Are Human.
Yes.
But the Men Are Human, I'm pretty sure the Men Are Human website is that account that runs that website is associated in some way with the men's rights subreddit, because it's the communications there are pretty similar.
Yeah, and I think it's I could be wrong, but I think it's Thomas Carney, who I've actually had on the show before.
And it's the @ men _are _ on Twitter. Another one, if you're on Twitter and you follow, like if you follow me on Twitter, I'm at Onero's Grip. I recently retweeted a thread where I said important thread, and the originator of that thread, his name is Michael, and he is full of information. So you'll see him tweet a lot of history, a lot of statistics, and a lot of logic related to the statistics and the history. It's something that everybody should be paying attention to. If you're part of the movement, you'll want access, basically, to the information that he's providing. I can't find my retweet of that. That's really weird.
Yeah. I don't know how
that's really weird. I didn't think it was that old. Oh, here it is. Okay, so Michael Stretton, and it's at MSS3. His handle is kind of odd, at MSS3 Rosa ROSA FERREUM, and that's all one word.
Right.
So follow him, and you'll see a lot of tweets with links. He gives links to statistics and to studies, to old news stories, all kinds of stuff. Very good person to follow for information.
All right. So thank you so much for the super chow, and I hope that this helps. I'm going to play some more of the video.
A message like smash the patriarchy will sound more or less relatable depending on your life circumstances. A middle-class white woman might see the dismantlement of patriarchy as the only limit between her and her liberation. But a woman of color working at a warehouse cannot relate to that. Many working-class women understand that patriarchy may be responsible for their present condition, but they don't have the material means to fight against it. So it's our job to maintain a clear vision of where we're heading, no matter how utopian it may be, but also to set more achievable goals that might not be as radical, but will help in democratizing the movement.
Achievable. So she's talking about dismantling the scaffolding on which society is built, which she refers to as patriarchy. But really, when feminists say patriarchy, they think they mean an oppressive system under which men have power and women don't, or women are largely excluded from it. In reality, what they are claiming, what they're talking about, what they want to dismantle, they are talking about the relationship between men and women, in which men are dedicated to women's safety, security, and welfare. And if they dismantle that, men will have no reason anymore to maintain a society that is convenient for women, safe for women, enjoyable for women, healthy for women. Like, they won't have any reason to provide things for women. And maybe women who have gotten a degree that allows them to work in what they consider to be a man's world might expect to survive. But women who live paycheck to paycheck, who pay their own bills or pay a portion of their household's bills, women who struggle, they're going to know if that partnership vanishes, they're on their own. They become equal to men. They become unsupported because our society does nothing to support men. And women as a demographic, like individual women might do something to support their male partners if they are aware enough of their relationship to care, right? But as a demographic, women do nothing to support men. In fact, they tear them down, right? So they're going to be in a position, those women who are struggling, they know they're going to lose a huge resource if men's relationship to women is taken away. And I think what she doesn't understand is there's, even among minority feminists, right? Whether it's Black feminists, whether it's Muslim feminists, whether it's feminists of any other ethnic group or religious group or cultural group, feminists who maybe are low income but receive a lot of welfare in society, like single moms who get free housing and free utilities and a food stamp card and a monthly check and stuff like that. Which I don't necessarily consider them impoverished because they're getting paid to not earn their own money. Like all of those women are going to be fucked if men suddenly stop taking care of women. Their whole lifestyle is financed by men's taxes, men's labor, men's blood, sweat, and tears. Men's heart attacks at 55 years of age because they had 2 jobs in order to support their household, since part of their income is being taken to support somebody else's household, right? Men's getting cancer from working in a factory for 30 years that had asbestos they didn't know about, right? Men's injuries where they've lost an arm or a leg or had something puncture them abdominally in a workplace accident, right? Men's injuries where their back is wrecked and they're in pain constantly every day for the rest of their lives, and being told, you're just going to have to learn to live with it because we're going to take away your pain medication because women are dying from overdoses, right? That's what's going to be taken away from those women who struggle. Like men's sacrifice that feminists never acknowledge. They're wanting to dismantle something that women who struggle either consciously or unconsciously know that they can't afford to let it go, right? Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't realize what she's up against.
They don't. They just want what they want in the moment.
What's really interesting is, if you really think about it, we're more interested than they are in genuinely dismantling the system that they call patriarchy, but not the entire system. We want the dedicated relationship between men and women to go back to valuing each other and recognizing each other as human beings and parts of the community, and a higher level of responsibility for women than we have now, and a lower level of sacrifice for everybody that is more evenly applied. Right? The idea of sacrificing women today is alien. But women used to sacrifice. Once upon a time, a woman's choices were not just taken for granted that she was going to have, choice. A woman demanding choice in a circumstance where a man was expected to sacrifice to provide for her, like that, she was seen as very entitled, very, very very selfish, basically, like very self-aggrandizing, right? So she should be careful what she's asking for, because there are those of us that are fighting for what really should happen. And we just dismantle her patriarchy, she's going to have to learn to swim. I think the reason that impoverished feminists, genuinely impoverished feminists, women who genuinely struggle but have still latched onto this false ideology, the reason that they are not as easy to convince to just, yell, smash the patriarchy and go do really nonsensical things, walk in a slut walk and do other silly demonstrations that don't have anything to do with actual change, is because they know They don't want to live under that circumstance. They don't want to become responsible for themselves on the level that men are responsible. So they don't want what these women are going to achieve if they get what they want or what they say they want.
Right.
And these women don't either. The difference is the privileged feminists don't know what they're fighting for, and the less privileged feminists do. At least a little bit.
All right. Let's play some more of the video.
I'll give you one example that works pretty well all over the world: public transportations. Investing in public transportation is feminist because statistically men use more car and women more public transport. And that's also something
Hold on.
for the environment.
Well, let me play.
Investing in public transportation is feminist, and she says because men use vehicles more. No, it's because public transportation is funded by tax dollars, paid for by men, used by women.
Yeah.
Right.
But
that's why it's feminist.
But then, like, do women not want to be with men who have a car? Because I'm fairly certain that's like a bare minimum requirement that women have of men, is that men own a car. Like, if men didn't need to have a car, they wouldn't. They only get them because women like that.
Yeah.
Like, I lived in Chicago.
I don't know.
Like, my whole life.
Like,
and we had public transportation. So I never bought a car because I never needed to. But
I know a lot of guys that have cars because they like them, and they have specific cars. Like, they'll buy an old car and work on it rather than get a new car because they like that type of car. But I grew up in a small town, and there's a huge difference between people who grew up in small towns and people who grew up in urban areas.
Right.
Because small towns don't have the same...
Well, they don't have public transportation, or at least not as much of it.
So you can't leave the car guys out. And then you also can't leave out, like, there are women who just would not accept not having a vehicle of their own.
Sure.
And I've had a car since I moved out of my parents' house, the first time, and like that, I don't. It would drive me nuts to not have a car. Like, I wouldn't want to rely on somebody else to have a car for me. That would just... So but women like this woman, she probably wouldn't ever date a guy that didn't have a car.
Well, in where I grew up, that was the norm. Women saw a man with a car as a sign of status, even if it wasn't like some brand new thing. Like, you know, they had an old used car. It didn't matter. It gave a man advantage.
Right.
To, you know, get a date. But nonetheless, she's making a lot of assumptions with this regardless. Like, it, you know, we could get into like all of the, you know, little nuances of like the benefits of owning a vehicle or whatever. But this public transportation is feminist. And I think what she's really saying is that because it is a publicly funded, a government funded program, and that's what makes it feminist. And in Chicago, you still had to pay, you know, a couple bucks to use public transportation, and the price kept going up, by the way. I don't know how much it is now. So it wasn't like completely free. So not only were men, by and large, being taxed to pay for public transportation, but if men needed to use public transportation, they had to pay again. And of course, there were plenty of men who had to use public transportation because they made, well, at least in Chicago, parking is nearly impossible, and the bus or the train just seems more convenient. Of course, it also invites its own problems like criminality and stuff, but yeah, I mean, like, she's just saying something is feminist because it's publicly funded, I think.
Yeah, basically.
That's it.
So that's a good theme. Public transport. Period poverty is another thing. Providing support so that people like Rachel Keke, a former housekeeper and unionist, take some space in powerful institutions, the French Assembly. Okay, so these are reforms, they are quite limited, I totally get it. But these little victories will help galvanize people and drive support to the cause. That's why a movement like the Black Panther Party managed to get so much attention and media coverage. They simultaneously had a bunch of community programs with free food, free clothes, legal support, free health clinics. They had the goal to win Auckland's election, but they also had this very strong message: we will dismantle white supremacy. I'm not blaming feminists for having to spend hours on mainstream media talking about inclusive pronouns, not that they are not important. Language shape the way we think, the way we structure society. Those media platforms know very well that by forcing feminists to only talk about those things, they make it easier to discredit the movement and avoid talking about real issues where feminists can easily gain support. Things like...
So, okay. So, talking about pronouns is cringe because I guess she's saying it's not quite as important to feminism as the race and class stuff. By the way, I wouldn't have invoked the Black Panthers if I was you, but I understand it.
No, she painted such a rosy picture, though.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my god!
Nothing about any of the shootouts. Nothing about
nothing.
No.
No, none of that. But that was, again, this is she feels confident bringing it up because she isn't aware of the other side of that, the dark side of the Black Panther Party, or she's just intentionally ignoring it. But I wouldn't be surprised if she was just ignorant, or she believes that if there is another side, that's just white supremacist propaganda trying to lie about these people or whatever, right? But yeah, I mean, all I'm going to say is the whole civil rights movement is not as cut and dry as people say. It just is not. And
no.
Yeah, and you look into it. So.
Right. I love how she says that the Black Panthers, they were there to fight white supremacy. Good job, because it's totally gone now.
Yeah, and they're showing. She's showing footage of them giving food to the poor. Wow, somebody happened to have a camera in the 1960s when they were giving out food to the poor, and they just happened to tape this. Wow, it's
they recorded it on their smartphone.
Yeah, this is not a clear setup in any way. This is completely spontaneous. No, I mean, it's it's ridiculous. So,
well, I mean, she probably, when she discusses the suffragettes, she probably doesn't discuss suffragette terrorism either, so...
No, of course not. Yeah. No, they were just trying to get the vote. What are you talking about? It was very simple.
Yeah.
Why? This is, the thing is that, most normies, that if you tell them, well, actually, this is the truth about the suffragettes and the suffragists, and here's the truth about proto-feminism. It's feminism before feminism. And here's the truth about Margaret Sanger. And here's the truth about Planned Parenthood. They just glaze over, or they'll just they'll just repeat the same old talking. Well, I mean, I think the vote, women should have the right to vote, and then you have to explain that voting isn't actually a right. And then they're just like, what? And we've been told that it was for decades. And it's well, yeah, you've been lied to that's what I'm trying to get at, And it's just so exhausting. It's so exhausting. But all right, anyway, we're almost at the end here.
Like we said earlier, public transport, period poverty, etc. To conclude, feminism in Western and also in a significant amount of non-Western countries is facing a huge backlash. Even Suzanne Faludi notices that the misogyny is raw now. Right-wing people don't care about being politically correct when talking about women bodies, healthcare, etc.
Interesting. You're misogynist because we don't have control over your speech. Mm-hmm. And backlash against feminism is misogyny. It's not,
right.
It's not people thinking on their own terms and speaking on their own terms. It's you hate women if you don't support this specific viewpoint on how society should relate to women and men.
Yes. Exactly.
Media, we've seen the rise of the manosphere, the podcast, the videos. Now I think something we can do as feminists is...
Oh no, the manosphere! Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah.
There are men and women that are not fans of feminism out there in a place that has the word man in the title. This is so dangerous, guys.
And the fact that there are women involved does not preclude calling it the manosphere.
Yeah.
Because it's not dedicated to women, so therefore it is the manosphere.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with it being the manosphere, personally.
I know.
I think that they should have to face this. Like men should not be ashamed of wanting to like talk to each other about relationships,
Exactly.
marriage,
Right,
women,
but
feminism, whatever.
When they say manosphere, they're not talking about it the same way that, like, when we say manosphere, we're talking about this is a conversation about men's side of the story.
Yeah.
When they say manosphere, they're talking about it as, look at the evil, angry men.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're trying to say, like, these are dangerous men discussing dangerous things in their dangerous podcasts. And you know, this is a problem because we as feminists, like, essentially she's framing it like, you know, like, I don't know, like Sauron has reawakened and he's, you know, getting his army together, and they're about to invade, you know, Minas Tirith, and she's the only like person that knows, and she's trying to gather the troops, you know, Gondor calls for aid and all of that, and it's just really dramatic, and I'm just like, you know,
Yep.
And of course, she doesn't even want to listen to what anyone in the manosphere has to say. I mean, even though, like, probably the bulk of them just talk about dating, but...
And she doesn't want to acknowledge that there are women involved, because that would indicate that not all women are accepting of her narrative. And if not all women are accepting of her narrative, then she loses the power of saying, and I speak for all women when I say XYZ.
Yes.
No, bitch, you do not speak for us. You know,
Right.
We are dangerous men too. How's that?
Yeah, why not?
We frame debates whenever we have the opportunity to do so, to defy anti-feminist logic, like Hassan did with Andrew Tate a few days ago. That was very funny. Like Faludi did in the 80s with...
I'd have to see that video where Hassan supposedly destroyed Andrew Tate. I mean, like, ultimately, unless it was edited a certain way or Andrew Tate like fucked up, I can't see how Hassan could have won that. But you know what? There are a lot of debates that happen where like the feminist like obviously did not win, but all the feminist supporters believe they did anyways. And they're
well,
just
all
like,
they have to do is say things that feminists agree with.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they've proved that those things are true or not. Because they got to say something that feminists agree with, feminists will think they won the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just get blinded by the sentiment. And,
right.
They don't even know like if they actually said anything coherent. And my understanding is that debate with Hassan and Andrew Tate is one of the things that made Andrew Tate so popular. So like if he lost, then like like how does that work? So
well, that's just it. Like the feminist side of it is going to be, well, we got our talking point out, so we won. And they are not going to understand that just getting your talking point out doesn't necessarily mean you won anything, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you made your talking point look valid or gave people a reason to adopt your talking point or even accept your talking point.
Yeah.
Ahead, conservative women who liked power and traveling. We also need to listen to the most radical voices in the movement, to question our beliefs and to make sure that we don't lower our standards as we've been doing in the past decade. We also need to make sure our discourse is strong, that it's challenging, but it doesn't alienate women who may have a different experience of feminism depending on their life circumstances. I'm not a feminist activist per se. My activism is limited to my videos and a few local things. Nevertheless, I'm very politicized and I'm very interested in social movements. I worked on black social movements in the US for 2 years. That's why I wanted to make this video where I compiled...
All right, I think that's the end of her video. I don't really...
Yeah.
So she's basically like just giving us all of her credentials at this point, and I think there's much else to add. But suffice it to say, I think that we really need to be cracked down on our borders. to ensure that French women are not allowed in until they clean the tracks. No more French women. Sorry. If you want, like, you know, go to France and find them if that's what you really want. But frankly, I would prefer that, you know, we bring in more Cuban women, because I know, like, they've been through this shit before and they're more based. So let's let in the Cuban women and just kick out the French women. Like, I'm sorry, but if there's any French guys Haitians in the chat, I think you get it. I hope you do.
Haitians are included, and those goddamn Quebecois.
Yeah, well,
true.
It's not like the Quebecois would want to come to the States, because I think they hate us quite a bit, or be able to come to the States because their own country also hates them. So so they're stuck up there anyway.
Isn't it funny? Like, your country, if your country hates you, they won't let you out.
Yeah, I know, it's weird, but you know.
Well, you would think they would be like, yeah, go, leave. Well, we don't want you here.
Right.
But I mean, like, if those people leave, then who are they going to euthanize when they need to start euthanizing people? So I guess that's why they want to keep them around. So anyway, so that's the end of the video, basically. And it's cancer. I don't know what else to add, except that this woman, she's just trying to essentially, it's just another, like, you know, let's bring feminism back, guys, PR campaign. And I don't know why these people, I mean, I know why they insist on this, because essentially it pays their bills. Like, that's what I honestly believe. Like, this is about money and power, and there's did you notice through the whole video, and I mean, like, from beginning to end, she's talking about, like, how women are rejecting feminism, and oh no, and, like, you know, how pop culture or first world or choice feminism is bad because it makes feminism look bad. And then we get into, right, this whole history thing, and that we got to smash the patriarchy, yada, yada, yada. And then at the end of the day, it's just like, she's just she never at any point says, if this movement is unpopular, I wonder why, and then looks into it. Like, that never comes up. Like, there's no so she hasn't had her what's the word for it? Like, that moment of humility where you say, well, look, all of this time I thought I was right about this thing, and I decided that, like, if I'm so right about this thing, why is it so unpopular?
She hasn't had an epiphany, and she hasn't had her conviction. Like, that's more of a Christian term, but it's essentially, you're the holy shit, I've been wrong, and I'm completely human, and I need more information and guidance and understanding than I've been allowing myself to receive. And you can do that in a secular manner as well, in terms of all of a sudden realizing that your arrogant way of looking at the world, your perspective is not the only perspective on reality, and you might think, you might be the blind man examining the elephant that thinks it's a rope like entity, because all you feel is the tail, and you haven't seen the entire beast, right?
Yeah.
So she hasn't had that, and if the reason that you're the blind man feeling the elephant is because you have an ideological blindfold, which is what feminism is, your perspective is not going to change until you take the initiative to remove that blindfold. And she's not going to do that. She's actively fighting against doing that in this video.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time she's claiming to be trying to look from other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She's still got the feminist filter.
Yep.
Yeah, she even says it. Like, she goes, well, we need to listen to even the most extreme voices of the feminist movement. Well, do they have to be feminists for you to even consider their opinions? She's completely got her blinders on. Yeah. She's not really interested in a genuine conversation about anything other than what the feminist narrative is, you know?
Yep, of course. All right, so I got to wrap the show up here because I got to go pick up the wife so that I can patriarchally dominate her, because that's what I do on the house. So, you know, and if I'm late, then I'm going to take it out on her. But I don't really feel like taking it out on anyone, so I'm going to try not to. So we gotta wrap the show up here, guys. So if you like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications so you know when our shows go live. Leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about the video and what we talked about today. And now that it's over, I promise you we won't probably see anything from that woman for a while. I hope, I don't know. But yeah, and then most importantly, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of HBR Talk. Right? Today's Friday. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you for that, and we will talk to you all in the next video. Have a good weekend, and you know, try not to, I don't know, just try to have a good weekend. Is all I'll say. All right, talk to you later.
Yes. Peace.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.